Nancy, Lorraine, January 5th, 1477. A heap of frozen pack horses sits half-buried under powdery January snow outside the siege lines, starved before the relief army could arrive. Inside the walls, a dying city has held for 3 months. Outside, the wealthiest duke in Christendom waits in his frozen command tent, certain the mountain passes are impassable. His scouts confirmed the routes were sealed. His engineers mapped every approach. His artillery controls the only open road south. He does not need to move. The Burgundian lines stand entirely unaware of the specific horror already marching through the blizzard. Valois Burgundy operates as a sprawling conglomerate of wealthy territories spanning from the North Sea to Switzerland. 30 heavy field guns sit arrayed along a frozen ridge, representing a professionalized standing military power that terrifies regional neighbors. This immense state prestige is undermined by a crippling geographical divide between the northern manufacturing centers and the southern agricultural heartlands. The Burgundian army holds its narrow choke point, flanked by frozen rivers and dense woodland, anchoring the siege lines against any frontal approach. This structural fortress blocks the path of traditional diplomacy, locking local powers into a permanent cycle of containment. French gold systematically funds regional adversaries, driving the independent Duchy of Lorraine to form a deadly defensive alliance. A signed parchment treaty, stamped with heavy wax seals, unites the old Swiss Confederacy, the imperial Rhine cities, and the dispossessed local leadership. René II commits his army to a risky double envelopment through snowbound forests. René III believes the impenetrable western woods can hide his main assault force long enough to surprise the heavily fortified Burgundian lines. This bold strategy shifts the entire winter campaign from a stagnant siege into an immediate, bloody race for survival. A massive coalition force of nearly 20,000 men begins its steady northward advance along the banks of the Meurthe River. Thick woolen cloaks and heavy steel breastplates crunch against the deep snow drifts as the relief army approaches the capital. Charles the Bold commands his freezing troops to hold their lines, refusing to retreat despite severe winter attrition. René II diplomatically unites hostile Swiss cantons and regional Rhine cities through French finance treaties to reclaim his capital. The stage is set for a catastrophic clash of wills in the frozen valley. Charles the Bold assumes that a narrow defensive choke point will neutralize his opponent's massive numerical advantage and force a suicidal frontal assault. A flickering iron brazier illuminates the Duke's map inside his freezing command tent, reflecting an unyielding pride that overrides all tactical logic. His veteran advisors warn him that a late autumn campaign with a depleted, demoralized force is an act of tactical madness. He ignores their counsel entirely, blind to the shifting reality of the Burgundian Wars. He remains trapped in his own romanticized obsession, blind to the one move his enemy is already making. Wilhelm Herter von Hertneck orders the Swiss center force to bypass the main road and execute a silent flanking march through the western forests. A long wooden measuring rod taps against the scouts' topographical drawings, finalizing a brilliant tactical deviation. This critical command shifts the entire operational weight of the coalition army. The Allied captains recognize that a direct frontal assault plays directly into the deadly Burgundian artillery trap. This sudden, unyielding shift in direction ensures the coalition bypasses the prepared lethal zone entirely, setting a trap of their own. Compacted mud and deep snow drifts lock the Burgundian defensive lines into a narrow valley south of Nancy. High contrast, desaturated earth tones dominate the landscape, where the battlefield is severely constrained on the right by the Meurthe River and on the left by the Bois de Saurupt. Charles stakes the survival of his empire on holding this specific bottleneck, dismissing the dense woods as an impassable natural barrier. He believes his positioning is flawless, ignoring the creeping frostbite destroying his multinational mercenary force. This environmental paralysis leaves his static army entirely dependent on a single frontal engagement. The Allied army divides into two highly asymmetrical columns to exploit this rigid defensive posture. Bright steel halberds and 10-foot ash pikes form dense columns as René's vanguard advances openly along the riverbank to draw enemy focus. This visible movement acts as a calculated diversion, masking the primary striking force from immediate detection. To achieve absolute tactical surprise, the massive Swiss center column, nearly 8,000 infantry, plunges into a grueling, silent flanking march through the deep, snow-choked forests of the western ridge. They move without torches, in total silence. A sudden exchange of crossbow and handgun fire shatters the freezing air along the Jarville stream. Thick black powder smoke hangs heavy in the humid, below-zero atmosphere as the Burgundian right-wing cavalry checks the Allied advance. The tactical situation alters instantly across the valley floor. The timing slips. The Swiss center force emerges from the snow-laden western woods, slightly to the rear of the Burgundian left flank, 30 minutes early. This premature exposure forces an immediate, desperate scramble for positioning in the deep drifts. The sudden appearance of thousands of hidden infantry completely compromises the integrity of the Burgundian flank. The Swiss center sounds the war horns 3 times and launches a massive downhill charge directly into the Burgundian flank. The famed Boulevourie emits a deep, terrifying drone that echoes across the frozen valley, shattering the defenders' confidence. This is the critical moment where the Battle of Nancy 1477 escalates into a slaughter. Charles's troops stand frozen, watching an iron forest of pikes accelerate toward their exposed lines. The Burgundian flank is breaking. The artillery is lost, but the Duke of Burgundy is still mounted, still fighting. And the most powerful lord in Christendom is not the kind of man who leaves a battlefield alive. 3 seconds after contact, the Burgundian central square is no longer a formation. It is a collision site. Long ash pikes drive through the flank with crushing, unstoppable force. The disciplined Swiss vanguard simultaneously attacks across the Jarville stream, completely routing the Burgundian left wing and capturing the artillery. Freezing Burgundian gunners desperately try to pivot their 30 field guns to face the rear assault, but the heavy carriages remain frozen solid into the earth. A single frantic volley discharges harmlessly over the heads of the rapidly advancing wedge. This devastating tactical crisis worsens as an unexpected internal betrayal tears open the remaining Burgundian center. Cola di Monforte, Count of Campobasso, betrays the Duke and deserts the field, causing a total collapse of the Burgundian line. A blood-stained iron broadsword flashes in the pale winter sun as turncoat soldiers station themselves at the primary northern escape route to butcher survivors. His Italian mercenary cavalrymen systematically abandon their positions, turning their weapons against their own fleeing employers. This deliberate sabotage severs the line of retreat and triggers irreversible panic throughout the ranks. The panicked retreat funnels thousands of demoralized, starving soldiers between steep hills and a frozen river. Charles the Bold refuses to flee, fighting with suicidal ferocity as his household guard is systematically slaughtered around him. A heavy gilded longsword swings wildly in his gloved hand while he rides frantically across the disintegrating field, attempting to rally fleeing men. He has spent 30 years building the wealthiest state between France and the Holy Roman Empire. The cities, the treasury, the fleet, the name. He will not surrender it to a duke half his age in a frozen marsh in Lorraine. Charles the Bold is unhorsed at the icy Saint-Jean marsh and killed by a halberd strike that splits his helmet. Freezing black mud swallows his tumbling war horse as a group of Allied soldiers closes in for the final kill. A Lorrainer knight, partially deaf from a wound taken earlier in the battle, drives a lance through the fallen duke without hearing the desperate cries beneath him. Simultaneously, a Swiss halberdier delivers a devastating blow that cleaves the ruler's skull cleanly down to his right ear. This unceremonious execution instantly shatters the grand political architecture of Western Europe. Looters strip the fallen duke naked and leave his body to freeze in the mud, where it is partially gnawed by wolves. A barren, snow-choked ditch becomes the final resting place for the most powerful lord in Christendom. The surrounding fields fall into a horrific silence, punctuated only by the cries of scavenging birds. Over 90% of the Burgundian army perishes during the chaotic rout and its immediate 3-day aftermath. The victorious coalition begins a grim search across the frozen marshland, unaware of the exact horror awaiting them. René II of Lorraine orders search parties to comb the frozen battlefields and marshes to confirm his rival's fate. A flickering torch illuminates a naked, frozen, and horribly mutilated corpse deep in a ditch near the Saint-Jean pond. The face is completely unrecognizable, having been partially devoured by wild dogs and wolves. To verify the identity, the Duke summons a special committee, including the dead man's personal page, physician, and laundrywoman. This desperate group must rely on intimate physical markers to confirm the end of an empire. King Louis XIII of France swiftly annexes the Duchy of Burgundy and Picardy, integrating these wealthy lands directly into the French crown. A heavy iron signet ring seals the official royal decrees, accelerating the permanent centralization of the French state overnight. The sudden, unexpected dissolution of this wealthy sovereign state reshapes the political map of the continent completely. Because Charles died without a male heir, his sprawling multinational conglomerate vanishes, leaving an immense power vacuum across Western Europe. The wealthiest private treasury in Christendom, built over 3 generations, is now available to whoever moves first. How would the modern map of Europe look if Charles the Bold had survived and successfully forged his independent Middle Kingdom? A faded velvet map from the Dijon archives hints at a forgotten empire that nearly separated France from Germany forever. The sudden elimination of Burgundy leaves historians wondering about the fragile nature of dynastic success. Philippe de Comines, courtier, eyewitness, and author of the memoir, recorded the identification firsthand. A body confirmed not by documents, but by missing front teeth, a scarred knee, and the testimony of a laundry woman who had dressed him for decades. History's most powerful duke was identified by the people who knew him best. This unique convergence of personal testimony and forensic observation underscores the high stakes of medieval warfare. What happens to a grand inheritance when an entire dynasty collapses in the winter mud? A glittering gold dowry box symbolizes the fate of Mary of Burgundy, who must now protect her remaining lands from French expansion. Her rapid marriage to Archduke Maximilian of Habsburg transfers the immense wealth of the Low Countries to Austrian custody. This strategic union initiates a bitter, 300-year French-Habsburg rivalry that will dominate European battlefields for generations. This dynastic shift ensures that the blood spilled at Nancy echoes through centuries of continental warfare. The Battle of Nancy dissolves the independent Burgundian state, establishes early modern centralized monarchies, and ends the era of heavy medieval knightly dominance. A prickly thistle heraldic device now adorns the stone gates of Nancy, alongside the defiant motto declaring they cannot be touched with impunity. Duke René II secures permanent independence for the Duchy of Lorraine, constructing magnificent commemorative churches on the battlefield. The War of the Burgundian Succession immediately follows as France and the Habsburgs battle for the split inheritance. What neither side yet knows is that the daughter Charles left behind will make a single marriage decision that changes the map of Europe for 300 years. What du Guesclin began in a tent in La Mancha, Maximilian of Habsburg closes in a Flemish cathedral. One dynasty ends in a frozen ditch. Another begins with a handshake. Subscribe to stay with this series. The next engagement is already in production. If you are watching on a television screen, the QR code on screen now will take you directly to the subscribe button on your phone.